you ready? Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. So we'll call the meeting to order, and can we have a roll call, please?
Board Member Dyer.
Here.
Board Member Goodhue.
Here.
Board Member Hall.
Here.
Board Member Pomeroy.
Here.
Chair Croman.
Here. Will you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, under the Brown Act, public comments for matters on the agenda must relate to that agenda item, and public comments for matters not on the agenda must relate to the subject matter jurisdiction of this legislative body. This is a warning that if a member of the public attending this meeting remotely violates the Brown Act by failing to comply with these requirements of the Brown Act, then that speaker will be muted. Are there any public appearances? Okay, hearing no public appearances, we will move forward with any announcements. Are there any announcements? No announcements, so we'll move forward with the consent agenda. Item number 1 is the Certified Local Government Annual Report.
I was just
You certainly may.
going to ask how that went, and it sounds like we made some progress with the context statement and things like that, or maybe that was in last year's. Is there anything new or an issue or significant about the latest report? No? Okay, that's just on the consent agenda. Okay.
Okay, anything to brief out on that? No?
No, nothing substantially different from last year.
Okay, sounds great. Then we have a report on the Comstock cottages, which we were provided.
We have to pass the consent agenda.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Can I have a nomination or a motion to pass the consent agenda?
I'll make
Or
a motion.
I'd like to pull that for a minute.
Yeah,
I was a little confused with giving Comstock credit for designing
oh wait,
the
we're still on the,
We're still on the
sorry,
con-
we're
the
still
top
on the
one.
first, item number 1.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay,
I'll second.
can we have a vote, please?
Board Member Dyer.
Yes?
Board Member Goodhue.
Yes?
Board Member Hall.
Yes.
Board Member Pomeroy.
Yes.
Chair Croman.
Yes. Okay, and then we have the report on the Comstock cottages, and that was provided to us in the agenda. We saw about 30 Comstock cottages with a good laydown of each. And Esther, you wanted to address that?
Yeah, I think there needs to be some differentiation between Comstock as a designer and Comstock as a contractor. He didn't design what became the China Arts Center. That was done by an architect named Winter from San Francisco. So I know that was just not quite copacetic with me. So he probably was a contractor on a lot of buildings in town, and that would be interesting to know. It might be interesting for the report to include that.
Any other discussion on the Comstock cottages? I know one of the reasons we asked for that was because of the ones that we've seen recently, but also we had talked about Catherine's kind of suggestion that we do some type of, some type of event that honors the 100 years of Comstock. So any other discussions or comments or suggestions on that?
I'm sorry, I know there has been discussion with Carmel Heritage Society about doing something. I think the Voruses may be involved in creating some sort of celebration. So I don't know how large that is or the details of that or exactly when that will happen, but possibly, I've heard possibly later this spring or and possibly in the fall, maybe there's of course the AIA Monterey Bay Carmel Heritage Society house tour, and I think the emphasis will be trying to get a lot of comp stocks on that as well, apart from the Oasis project. So there'll be opportunities, at least with those types of events, to celebrate. And I don't know what the city or our board wants to do anything specific to, but that's,
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
No, Catherine may have some thoughts on that.
yeah.
If we open up public discussion.
Sure, let's open
yeah.
up the public discussion.
Mr. Chairman and members of the Historic Resources Board, I have been doing a little research on Hugh Comstock in terms of, and I think Esther is correct, Commissioner Goodhue is, the board member Goodhue, in that he is basically a well-known contractor because he signed himself that way when he was doing the census and other documents that I've seen in the research. But I just wanted to mention one thing to you today that it's more of a human interest section of this, and that is dealing with Mayada Brown, his wife, Comstock. And this, I found this article in the Oakland Tribune that was dated April 20th, 1924, so practically 100 years ago. And the title of it says, "Carmel Artist Weds Yolo County Man." So they're giving the emphasis to Mrs. Comstock. So it says, Miss Mayada Brown of Carmel was married to Hugh Comstock of Winters, Yolo County, on the 14th in Salinas by Justice of the Peace Wallace. I wonder if he's related to you. Those attending the ceremony were the bride's mother and father, Mr. and Mrs. T.M. Brown, her sister, Miss Elena Brown of San Francisco, Mr. and Mrs. George Seidnick. The bride and groom left Salinas for San Francisco, and from there will motor to their ranch. This is in 24. Later, they will return to Carmel for a few days before leaving on their wedding trip, which will take them east. 2 years ago, Miss Brown, this is all about Miss Brown, which I thought was very interesting, came to Carmel and started a new industry here, the making of the Otsy Totsy dolls. In this work, she has had a great success. She will not discontinue making these rag babies on account of her marriage. Well, she's an early feminist. But has made arrangements with her mother, a partner in the business, to carry on the work until the wedding trip is over. This summer, the Browns will take the Seidnick studio in the heart of Carmel as headquarters for the dolls. Mr. Comstock is the brother of Mrs. Seidnick. That's all he gets in the way of credit. So I think it's appropriate that we work together, and as time goes on in the next few months, there will be opportunities for us to figure out what we want to do. But it's encouraging to me to think that here we are in a sort of a, not a sleepy little town, but just in a small town with a man of his stature who has influenced so many people, and to be able to recognize that and perhaps in some way bring a little more notoriety to what he accomplished would be very good for all of us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other comments from the public? All right, we'll close it back and bring it back to the board. Any other comments from the board?
Yes, just an aside, a Comstock, and I don't know whether he was, recall whether he was the builder or the architect or both. We all saw via email Hagland, I believe it was, a house that is a Comstock, and in 2002, Chip Rarick said it was not historic because a second story had been put on the back of the house. And I thought, well, we put stories on the back of historic houses. Sometimes okay them, which is that issue again of conflict between what we decide is historic when we get it in the email versus what we do for historic homes that come before us. But I thought, do we want to save every Comstock? Do we not? I don't know whether it's historic or not historic. I'm not valuing one or the other on that. It may definitely not be. And it had some other changes as well. It just makes me nervous when we say a Comstock is not historic, and it was not a fairy tale Comstock. It was another more ordinary looking house. But I'm thinking, do we want to save our Murphys and our Comstocks because of how famous they were? I don't know. I mean, it's just something I'm throwing out there as a consideration that it just makes me nervous that we potentially could be tearing down a Comstock house.
Well, it kind of depends upon how many buttons are pushed. I mean, has the house been moved? Would the owner recognize it today? There are a number
There are all
of things.
kinds
Or
of
is it a
issues.
good, not just because it was designed by a well-known person, but are there better examples around? All kinds of stuff kind of
Yeah.
play into that.
Yeah, and absolutely. And it's just how much weight do we give to this, that, and the other? And when we decide a historic house comes before us, how do we allow certain things that we wouldn't allow maybe to be historic in a house that comes before us via email? Those kinds of
Yeah,
issues.
but
Yeah.
we're constrained by certain rules when we determine what's significant.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Whatever, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's it. Just wanted to throw that out.
super.
I think it's interesting, though, on the Comstock thing, in the Carmel City directory, his father-in-law is listed as a builder. And I really wonder how much input father-in-law had into any of this building stuff. I don't know how long he lived or, what the relationship was, but.
Okay, well, I know we asked the staff for that report. I think they definitely rose to the challenge, provided us with something good. I think, Esther, your points are well taken, but thank you very much for doing that. Okay, then we'll move it into the public hearing sector where we have the historic context statement phase 2 update.
Good evening. My name is Catherine, and I'm going to be speaking about the Historic Context Statement Update Phase 2, which some of this will be familiar to you all because we did Phase 1 in 2022, but for anyone new listening, and just for the record, I'm going to do a quick summary. So if you recall, Carmel's Historic Context Statement was first adopted back in 1994. And it was updated piecemeal in 1997 and 2008, and then most recently, 2022. And that 2022 update was a 20-year extension effort covering the period 1966 to 1986. And our context statement is Appendix I of our general plan, and it also serves as a foundation for our historic preservation program, Chapter 1732 of our municipal code. So what is a historic context statement? It is a narrative of historic, social, and architectural context that we use as a framework to better understand the significance or potential significance of built resources and the level of integrity needed to qualify them as historic. The city uses the context statement to evaluate which properties should or shouldn't be listed on our inventory of historic resources. As I mentioned, in 2022, we did a Phase 1 update covering a 20-year period, and that update was funded by the California Office of Historic Preservation, which I'll just refer to as OHP, and it was a Certified Local Government, or CLG, $30,000 grant. So as we got the update underway, it became clear to the consultant, which is past consultants, and to city staff and the Historic Resources Board and the community that really the entire context statement was in need of a bit of an overhaul. However, because it was a grant-funded project, we had an inflexible schedule and reporting deadlines that really limited our effort to just that 20-year extension effort. So, understood to be a Phase 1 update, that extension was approved by OHP and adopted by our city council, and also adopted by the California Coastal Commission just last summer. And that's required because it's part of our general plan. So now here we are ready to start on Phase 2. Just last year, we applied for and received a second OHP CLG grant, this time for $40,000. And the City Council in January approved a professional services agreement, again with past consultants. We're very happy to work with them again for continuity from phase 1. And this phase 2 update kind of has 3 goals that I'll be briefly talking about. We also have Seth from past consultants online, I believe. So our 3 goals are consistent formatting, chronological themes, and streamlined content. To start with, consistent formatting. So past consultants did their 20-year extension in a fashion that meets current guidelines for context statements. So this latest up-to-date section now contrasts a bit with the bulk of the document, which was authored in prior decades. And the contrast is really the most evident when you read the architectural content section. So we have our late mid-century styles that past recently formatted to have photographs, character-defining features, and representative buildings, whereas the earlier parts of the document, that early 20th century era, is just described narratively and pretty generally. So it is imperative that the architectural styles of the early 1900s now receive the same attention, and the entire document is formatted consistently. We also see a need to do chronological themes. The current context statement has 5 thematic chapters. Those are on the left on the slide, and they're not at all chronologically ordered. There is a lot of overlap with the time periods, and I think this presents a challenge to the reader. So past consultants has proposed a new table of contents, and chapter 3 would include chronological themes. We can discuss this after the presentation to see what you think of the titles and the breakdown of the time periods. But we think that chronological ordering would make the document much easier to navigate. And then lastly, we really want to make every effort to streamline the content. And I want to read this as offered by the Office of Historic Preservation. They say, historic context statements are not intended to be a chronological recitation of a community's significant historical events or noteworthy citizens or a comprehensive community history. Rather, historic context statements need to be direct, to the point, and easily understood by the public. So while Carmel's current context statement includes an abundance of information within its 125 pages, it's not really direct to the point or easily understood by the public. So this phase 2, we intend to result in additional content. We're adding more. The architectural style sections, we want photographs. We're adding evaluative criteria. Is it eligible for the Carmel inventory or the California Register? So all of this is going to be adding more content, and unless the existing content is streamlined, the document might be too unwieldy and overwhelming. So part of this phase 2 is going to include reviewing the current content for relevancy. We envision the current content some of it being retired, and it would remain available as a reference document in our local history room, but it wouldn't be in the context statement. And remember, if we remove reference of an individual, it doesn't mean a property they lived in isn't significant. We would just put that in-depth information and analysis in a DPR form instead of the context statement. And I just pulled an example in the past hour here. I just opened up our context statement, found a sentence, and this individual, Dr. Carl Rendorf, this is the only reference of him in the entire document. No other context before or after, so we don't know where's Carl's house, how was he active in village life. We don't know, but that kind of information would be something the city and the consultant would find out when we're assessing a property, and it's really just adding length to our context statement without being very helpful. This is our approximate project timeline. We are asking the board to consider the new table of contents this evening and provide feedback. And then we do have a pretty compressed and inflexible schedule again due to this grant. So we're aiming to bring the board a working draft in July and a final draft in September. And staff is also seeking guidance on whether the formation of a subcommittee is needed for this project. In lieu of a subcommittee, staff is prepared to provide monthly status updates at the regularly scheduled board meetings. And this approach could allow greater participation by the full board and also the public. So we're interested to hear your thoughts on that. And I think Seth is online and might also have some things to add to reintroduce himself and talk about phase 2. Leah, is Seth on?
Hello?
We
Can
can
I-
hear you. We can hear you.
Great, great. I just switched computers and Zoom is a little new on this computer, so I can see my company name, but I don't see our faces. Sorry about that, guy. Let me try joining as a panelist here. I still don't see us. Well, as long as you can see us, well, that should be fine. So Kent is here with me. Catherine, that was a great presentation. Thank you so much. And you know, we were going to start out with just a couple of documents. Probably the most important one is the State of California OHP preferred format for historic context statements, and that's where Catherine pulled that quote about what these. That should work now. There we go. That quote came from the discussion in this document, and I'd urge everybody on the board just to download it. A Google search for historic context statements. What did I do? I did a National Register Bulletin historic context statements, and I got this information in a second. And I had forgotten, frankly, how good this 2-page document is. Essentially, with the historical background, what we're doing is creating themes that are related directly to the architectural development of the town. And the reason why the current themes aren't appropriate is because they're just too general and there's no relationship to the buildings. Basically, what the historic content statement does is categorize your existing resources and connect them to the historical developments of the town. What we have right now is essentially what OHP says they're not, and it's basically what Catherine just said, but let me just read this to you quickly. Historic context statements are intended to provide an analytical framework for identifying and evaluating resources by providing, focusing on, and concisely explaining what aspects of geography, history, and culture significantly shape the physical development of a community or region's land use patterns or built environment over time. So we have these very broad brush historical narratives right now that don't relate to the built environment. The essence of an HCS is for us to categorize and document the built environment and then discover how they relate to the historical development of a given place. In this case, it's Carmel. So that is why you see this sort of change in the table of contents, which we'll probably go over soon. The table of contents right now is the bulk of what we're going to do is in that thematic chapter. A lot of the other stuff is what I call front end stuff, describing the framework. We'll describe the history of the document, the introduction. But the meat of the document is broken up into 4 or 5. We have 5 themes. We chose them based on clear levels of demarcation on how the city developed over time. And then what we will do is we will create the kind of things that you saw in the 66 to 86 update, where for each theme we will have all of the architectural styles that would appear during that time period, what their character defining features are, good photographs, representative examples, and then we would have charts or tables of eligibility requirements and integrity thresholds. Because essentially one of the biggest things the context statement does, and we just heard Carol Hall talking about this, what Comstock is an important Comstock, which one is not an important Comstock. Well, the question this document would answer is, well, first of all, does it have enough integrity, and does it possess enough character defining features for that to illustrate that theme? And that's basically why we're doing a phase 2. and what I'd like to get guidance from the board today is how much we can edit the current document. The way we see it, this document, probably 40% of it will go, maybe more, you know. And I have ways that we can try to track and figure out how to do that. But it's an excellent sort of global cultural history of Carmel. It's not a built history of Carmel. That's probably my biggest concern as we start this out is how much latitude does our team have to edit and to remove, and we certainly don't want to shortchange any aspect of that report. But what we want to do is create a streamlined document, and the best example that I would love the board to check out, and you can walk over and see if it helps you, is the Pacific Grove Historic Context Statement. It was done according to these guidelines. Kent and I both use it a lot. Meg Clovis uses it a lot when she works in that town to sort of as a way to have a reference for how we analyze the buildings in a phase 1 or a phase 2 environment. And it's structured, and its table of contents is very similar to what we have, because this is pretty much what you see in the PGHCS is pretty much how context statements are written now, whether it's by us or by ARG or anybody else. They're pretty much going to look like this. And the idea is someone comes in and asks planning about a building, and it's built in 1928. We would go into that thematic chapter in 1928. We would see it's a Tudor Revival building, and then we would go to the charts to see if it has the eligibility requirements and the integrity threshold, and if all that's yes, we now know it could theoretically be historic, and that informs the phase 1 analysis, and it also informs the public. So that's, I think I'll leave it. What would you like to say?
No, you said it.
I guess we'll leave it there. Let me figure out how to unmute. It's been a while. How to mute. Thank you.
We appreciate that. And actually, the staff provided us with a copy of the PG context statement in our packet, so that's great. Okay.
Nothing else for me?
Nothing else from the staff? Any comments, initial comments from the board?
Just a slide that Catherine showed us of the change in the table of contents there. I think there were 5 or 6 points, and then how it would change. And I noticed, yeah, wherever that is, let's get that first. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. There it is. Okay, existing versus proposed. And so village in a forest, I see 1924 to 1945. I think we have a village in the forest now, so or that's what we're promoting anyway. So I'm not sure if that describes just 1924 to 1945, or whether it could be called something more clearly relevant to the homes built during that time. Just a comment, a thought.
Seacoast of Bohemia is kind of interesting. That's taken from Franklin Walker's title. He's not around anymore to sue, I guess, but he did cover that period pretty well.
Since we have Seth online, Seth, would you like to kind of give a little background on these potential names?
Yeah, I'm going to defer to my partner here on that, since he's been doing this for 50 years and has spent more time in Carmel than I could possibly ever do, probably, and how you came up with those and then how we agreed on them. Go ahead.
Basically, it comes out of the Pinecone and out of some of the local literatures at the time. 2 things happen at the same time. Custer comes to town, and to pay for his theater of the Golden Bough, he creates a very interesting European courtyard, the Court of the Golden Bough. At the same time, Comstock's on the other side doing the Dollhouse. And out of that, literature arises that literally says this is a village in a forest. And that theme was taken on by the community to go forward. 2 little problems: the Great Depression and World War II. We take it up to 47, 48, because that's when you start to see a lifting of the restrictions on housing, frankly, that occur within those periods. And we feel, as I'm looking at the chair and the document above him, that what the Carmelites said about themselves should be the things that define what goes on over time until some new thing comes along, which is the basically the very, very short pre-war but mostly post-war introduction of the Bay Area tradition. And that tradition continues today, along with others. So does that help?
It does help. Thank you.
And I think, Carol, to clarify, the theme is titled based on when that theme occurred the first time. Does that make it a little clearer? So, Village of the Forest is when let's say that's the peak of that sort of development, and then the buildings will date within that year range that you see in parentheses.
But it could still continue today, is what, right?
Yes.
It doesn't mean
Sure.
that it
Yeah.
stops suddenly. 1940.
No, not at all. This is just how stuff comes in over time.
Yeah, I
Right.
think you still use it in advertising.
Well, there's no doubt that that Carmel is very different now from what it was during that period. I mean, it was really a forest then, with people, living in their tents and building houses without bathrooms and, very different kind of deal.
And these are, I think, just meant to be evocative titles
Yeah.
for an era and not all-inclusive, I wouldn't think. So, as you say, it's redefining or organizing the document into a more clear chronological way, and these are just these evocative titles for those particular time periods where tons of things are included under them, which would certainly be, some of that being the continuity of one to another, I would think.
Yeah, thank you.
Other thoughts from-
I guess they agree with me. So.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think the titles are that descriptive. I don't know what Carmelo means. I don't know what Seacoast of Bohemia means.
Evocative, not descriptive.
Yeah.
It's a good book, you should read it.
Yeah, it's true that the prior ones had more of a sense of what they were talking about than the proposed ones, it seems.
I don't know, it resonates with me. I like the titles.
The titles are fine, I just don't know what they mean.
Well,
I think what we're trying to demonstrate here is that in today's world of developing thematic approaches to any location's development, in this case it's the entire city, is that economic development is not a theme. Every city in the entire world develops economically. Every city in the entire world has architectural development. You see what I mean? These are not themes. This is a context statement written over 25 years ago, and frankly, that's how context statements were. Historic context statements, if you want a little history of how they got developed, was essentially a way of developing a report that would codify that would summarize the historical developments in a town and relate it to the built environment. And it comes out of, if you read National Register Bulletin 24, it comes out of the Secretary of Interior standards for this historic preservation planning process. And I've just marked real quick standard number 1. Preservation planning establishes historic context, so that's what we're doing here. But it uses historic concepts to develop goals and priorities for the identification, evaluation, registration, and treatment of historic properties. See, so our document right now tells the history of Carmel in a very, very detailed way, and it's outstanding for that. But it does not relate to any kind of preservation planning on what we do with the given resources. And that's why the thematic approach came into play, probably starting early 2000s, maybe 2008, something like that. The ones I wrote for Monterey County's ag resources, we tried to use that approach, but very different because we were covering an entire county, and a little more difficult to codify all the different architectural developments. But it's an approach that makes, it's almost like what historic structure reports are now for a building when you're going to restore it. It's a one-stop shopping for the building. In this case, this is a one-stop shopping for the architectural development of a community. So the historic context, the buildings are what we present are intended to be what illustrate that context. I don't know if that helps, but anyway.
So let's carry that a little further. So how would we, as individuals on the HRB, use the historic context statement as opposed to like Kent or Meg Clovis or a historian that, has a recommendation for whether something's historic or not? I can see them going back through and picking out the characteristics of a certain era and so forth and determining whether a house met those historic determinants. How would we on this board be involved in the historic context statement in terms of using it in our decision making? That would help clarify for me.
Okay, well, to take your example of a Comstock building, let's say it was built within, I don't have my exact dates on my things here. Let's just pick a time period when it got built. Let's say it got built in 1927. Okay, so based on that time period alone, the theme would be village in a forest. Now, what you would do then is you would go out and examine that building, do a field visit, whether it was Meg Clovis or myself as your on-call historic preservation consultants. We would do this too, or Kent sitting right here. You would go out and look at the building. Let's say it's one of his Tudor revivals, and you're using it to determine if what you're looking at is what someone said earlier. Would the person that constructed it recognize it, right? So does it have sufficient historic integrity? And if you look at the Cal Register and the National Register, if it doesn't, it's not an historic building. So a lot of what this report is intended to do is to allow the board or us or the public have sort of a broad stroke about whether this building will qualify or not. It's what I'd love for them to do, but we have a phase 1, phase 2 process is here. Could you save time and money and not have to do a phase 1 sometimes? But I've discussed this with planning staff, and because of CEQA and everything, I don't think that's going to happen. So it's more about having us all understand whether this building fits into something that's important to preserve, whether it's important to keep, and if it is something that would meet the Carmel Historic Resource Inventory, then we would do a phase 2 and do our work to make sure any changes meet the standards.
But I mean, ideally, this is the end user this is being built for is the public. So I think that's something that we have to keep in mind. It shouldn't be geared towards, historic preservation professionals. It's got to be geared at least to a level where the public can understand it without having to consult, one of you guys or someone like that. And that's, I think, what we're trying to get to. And I think we, the last iteration made great steps by providing pictures and things like that, made it a lot more understandable.
Yeah, it's a very visual document. I mean, the best I could ask everybody to do is to read the Pacific Grove historic context statement. Look how visual it is. There's mapping. In each theme, we're going to have a GIS map that shows all the buildings in Carmel that were built during that time period. So one could go and find those buildings based on the context statement. One could check them out. It'll be whatever major developments that happen during these time periods, infrastructure, roads, however a town develops, all the different types of property types, from commercial to residential. Of course, we're mostly a residential city, but there's a lot of commercial buildings. You're in each thematic chapter, again, using Pacific Grove as an example, will be sort of a visual and historical presentation of the major developments that are reflected in the built environment. The statement Catherine read about that one person that was in the context statement, we have no idea where his or her house was or what they did or why they were important. It's not useful in a context statement, and that's not what this report is for.
And I think you need to remember as well, one of the things that we'll include is man-made landscaping. You had a village in a forest because the forest was rebuilt over time because of the standard pattern of laying out the roadways back in the 1880s and again in 1903 or so. One of your major features of the community that was with everybody is the central row of trees down Ocean Avenue. They weren't there to begin with.
Okay, so our goal today is to review the table of contents and kind of give you guys some feedback and give you a way forward with that, right? So unless the board has an objection, I think we just look at it item by item. So look at item 1 inclusively, item 2 inclusively, and then we can certainly make comments or suggestions based on that. And what I would say is, because this is a fairly long process, if the public has comments that they want to share, I would just ask you to come to the podium and we'll recognize you rather than open and close over and over again. Okay, so we can start with the introduction portion. Number 1, any comments on the introduction, items within the introduction?
I will note that staff has initiated the tribal outreach. On May 1st, we did mailings to 13 tribal representatives, inviting them to participate in the project.
That's great. Okay, hearing no comments on item 1, I think that can stand. So going to item 2, identifying and evaluating historic resources.
Well, I'll just make one
Oh,
statement.
sure.
I really appreciate having one of the parts of that section 1 is how to use this document, which is what we didn't have before, and in a significant way, because it was the organizational mess previously. So
Yeah.
this is really going to help, as you say, Chair, about allowing the public to understand the document and how to use it.
Okay, so item number 2. I do have one comment as I was looking through this. I think, as I mentioned earlier, we have come a long way with really good representative pictures and things like that. But one thing we as a board face, and I think that causes a lot of confusion within the community, and certainly even the staff discusses this, but we often find homes that are looked at as historic, and then we get the comment this residence is no longer retains its integrity due to alterations, additions, changes, and things like that. And that is a fairly subjective assessment. And so it would be, I know we could never come up with something that is completely conclusive, but would it be possible to provide some examples of things that make a property ineligible, maybe with some examples in there as well?
Jordan, would you like a response?
Yes, sir.
Okay, what I would, again, when the thematic chapters are laid out, whatever year that building was constructed, you'll go into that chapter and there'll be a chart of integrity thresholds and eligibility criteria that you will go through and scan. And typical examples would be, does the building retain its original form and roof line? Does it retain its original pattern of windows and doors? Does it retain its original cladding? One we added, which I have not seen in previous context statements, is do additions meet the Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation? I mean, these additions are all going to be under the rehabilitation standard. And you could say, yeah, that's subjective too, but it's, based on the commission's experience, which is strong, and our consultants locally, their experience, I think we can all come to a consensus whether a building we look at, or say a homeowner came in and bought a building that was added onto. I think we could all, with this report, make a pretty good argument for whether what's been done to it meets the standards or not. But you would go through these sort of bullet points, right? So if there's a huge front addition on the building, you already know this building is highly altered, right? That addition probably didn't meet the standards. You're not going to. It's broad brush in the sense that it'll narrow you enough to make a determination of integrity, right? But since we're going to evaluate on a phase 1 anyway, you may have to delve more into say researching a specific homeowner, right, which would be a phase 1 kind of a thing. But to answer your question on altered buildings, that's why we're trying to break this up thematically, and we're trying to have it be very visual. So the public or the planners or any of us can feel confident that decisions that we're making from a planning standpoint are the right decisions on the building, which ultimately mean the right decisions for the owner.
Yeah, There is a item C, historic integrity, on there that I think might be a good place, though, for a general layout of things that make again, if this is for the public, that would preclude a building from being considered as a historic building, and it will not be a one size fits all for sure. But here are some things that will prevent a building from being considered historic. And maybe we put some pictures in there as well and things like that. But I think that is still it's really fuzzy still, even for us. This is something that we debate routinely, and I think that's something that maybe we could bring some light on. So just a suggestion as you think through the process, might be something that we want to add in there.
Okay, I've taken notes. Maybe provide examples. Maybe one historic, one not historic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That would be
Sure.
helpful, yeah.
Okay.
But I think this is an amazing section. Correct me if I'm wrong, Catherine, but I don't think the city has this type of information, which we use on our reports, and we review it every day or every month as a board, and the consultants certainly do it. But for the public, this kind of information is not located in one spot, so it can be easily digestible. So this is, I think, when people start asking about these questions, what is historic integrity, or what is, how do you know it's historic? You maybe have heard those questions from people coming up to you on the street. As a board member, you can point them in one place where that is really described. I mean, I think it's great.
Yeah.
Here's another question. What if it's 1955 and someone builds a Tudor that's supposed to have occurred earlier, and then it comes up for historic status, but it's not part of the years in which we talk about Tudor, but it has all the characteristics of Tudor. What happens then? Anything?
Well, so you're saying in your example, we've got to say maybe a 1950s slant roof modern, and someone builds a Tudor in front of it? Then it's a slant roof modern that has no integrity. It's not historic.
I think I can rephrase the question a little bit.
Wait.
I think
yeah.
I was understanding Carol to ask, what if someone builds a Tudor revival building in the early 1970s? And then it comes to us to be evaluated. It's a style that we assigned to an earlier era. How do we look at revival styles?
Yeah, enough time has gone by where it's now eligible to be historic, right?
Yeah, I think you just have to, Tudor is a style. It depends upon who built it. If it's a good example of a trend in, look at Yale University. They built a whole, quadrangle or whatever, the Gothic style. Things like that, happen. There are historic. Actually, 10 years ago, we built a modern Tudor house, and it's not at all unusual. In fact, there's a wonderful arts and crafts house right next to the post office. And that was built within the period that we're going to be looking at now, which I think is pretty exciting because there are so many vernacular, in my mind vernacular, because I don't know who designed them or where they stand, but so many houses around town that I really would like to see preserved.
Short answer?
We just kind of ran that by each other. Go ahead.
The short answer would be, is it over 50 years of age?
Yes.
Right.
And we do have gas stations that were replaced by 24 examples of storybook and Tudor revival that exist in the main core of town and help it out, quite frankly.
So I think you would, to answer your question, you would still look at the Tudor revival style and see if your current building has those character defining features.
Okay, so it wouldn't
And
matter if it
does.
was later than the section that describes it as such. Okay.
No, it's a great question. That was a real interesting question. So, and it really gave me pause, but I would think that's how you handle it. I don't think there'd be very many, right, obviously, but you're right, people are building the arts and crafts style right now. So 50 years from now, let's say it was built 25 years ago, so in 25 years, it's eligible to be evaluated.
Yeah, much more common in Carmel than most places, I think, yeah.
Yeah, especially the period revival and the craftsman styles, right? You're going to see modern examples of that. That would be, that's a good question, but if it comes up, I would say that's probably the best approach.
Maybe
You know, 'cause-
a paragraph or two kind of explaining that would help, that if it's a style that's not within a period that it is described, it's still, and is over 50 years old, it could still be evaluated based on the criteria for the era that you would expect that kind of house to have shown up. If that,
And that's consistent with federal law.
what's that?
Or there's,
I say that's consistent with federal law, state law, the
Okay,
50-year mark at this point.
okay, well, that's good.
I mean, I think maybe Don and Esther's house is a good example too, because it's obviously a modern version of the Tudor style. So if you simply looked at the character defining elements of the modern style, there would be a lot of differing aspects to that house, but you could, and there'd be things in the Tudor style that you could apply to it. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's done in an inauthentic way with mishmashing of styles if it comes together so well as that particular house does. So anyway, it is a really interesting question.
Okay, any other comments on section 2? All right, section 3, historic themes associated with property types, eligibility criteria, and integrity thresholds. I think the past consultants did a good job, kind of overview, walking us through this, but thoughts on these specific areas? I mean, what titles are, something that we've had a little bit of a discussion on. I think that, we can agree that these are thematic in nature.
I'm kind of at a loss here because I didn't have the time this weekend to go through
Yeah.
all of this, so I
Yeah.
keep my mouth shut on this stuff.
It's a lot of reading. I kept looking for the executive summary. I couldn't find it.
I kind of agree with Kathy, Seacoast of Bohemia and Village and Forest, and post-war development I get. Continuity and change, I'm not sure what that says. And I don't have any suggested alternatives, but and Carmelo, well, that's a street. I go immediately to thinking about Carmelo Street, which is not what is intended here. Prehistory and Hispanic settlement, that I understand. So some of them are a little more vague or confusing to me than some of the other labels for these.
I kind of like them, actually.
Yeah.
But I think the emphasis, again, as I see them as evocative titles that express that era, but for everyone who's confused, you just look at the time frame. That's really what
Yeah,
we're talking
maybe
about.
the dates need to come first or something.
Yeah.
but-
Yeah,
Maybe
I don't
that's-
understand the Carmelo one, but.
Well, I think it's the
looked at
Carmelo catchment is what this area used to be a long time ago, right?
The what?
It was the Carmelo catchment. I know for some
I
reason,
don't know anything about that.
in my mind, the recruiting catchment for this area was the Carmelo catchment.
Yeah.
I don't know if that
I
goes
don't
on.
know either, but I know that.
It's the Spanish version of Carmel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was named after Mount
Well, maybe the
Carmel.
dates first, and then the descriptions would help. I don't
Or
know.
maybe a subtitle.
Or maybe we just need a little more context as we go forward. I mean, we will get numerous additional chances to A, hear about this, and B, to look at it. And I think maybe as we get more context and we dig into the context statement itself, maybe that will, help us understand the vision.
Because I think what it does is for ease of use, and which the other document, because they had things within the other document that was crisscrossing time spans all the way through the whole
Yeah.
thing. It was really confusing, and just keeping things into those exact years is really great. And that's what, if you are wanting to use the document and you wonder your house you're looking at was built within those years, you know what section to go, and that's very direct and simple. I see the titles as something like, wow, what does Seacoast of Bohemia means? It gives me what I like about it. It makes me want to learn, question it. Like, oh, what is that? What do they mean by that? It makes me want to read more. So it kind of I think it functions with the years being that way, and then it also gets people interested in
Well, it describes the
what that
area
means.
at the time,
Yeah.
whether you read the book or not.
I mean, that's why I look at it. At least.
Yeah. And
Would
the
you
same-
like us just to give a quick logic behind each of the titles? I'll have Kent do that. Would that help?
Sure.
Where the terminology came from? All right.
If you wouldn't mind.
Carmelo was the district during the Carmel mission up to the time of the name Carmel came into play as Carmel City, or the, Carmel-by-the-Sea. Those were name changes to the visual area. Of
Those were in
key
the
interest
Spanish
to
and
me
the Mexican terminology?
during Spanish-Mexican period, yes.
Okay.
And that was what this was called. It was the Carmelo district, the location where you went to, because there wasn't anything but a
Okay,
few
good. That
farm
clarifies it, thank you.
And on the continuity and change, we just spoke about a 1970 Tudor having all the attributes and characteristics that qualify. And so what is happening is somebody has looked at that particular part of Carmel, decided to come up with a design that was consistent with it. And so you had a continuity and change because it adds to the character rather than changes it somewhat. And also continuity and change, you have three, and we're in the fourth era of the Bay Area tradition. And that's a wooden tradition, a materials tradition that goes all the way back to Murphy.
And Seacoast of Bohemia?
Seacoast of Bohemia was when the folks were coming down from San Francisco after the fire and earthquake. There was a considerable amount of building here when you could buy a lot for $5 a month. And they brought their architects, they brought their skill sets down and went to work.
And going back to Carol's question about a newer style, I'm wondering if we have to put some of these period revival styles in that last theme, continuity and change. I mean, maybe we have to do a little repetition there so it's easier for the public. We'll have to think about that, all of us, but that just gave me another idea of how we could handle that question that you had.
Example, by the way, is if you go down to the corner of town by the Carmel Mission, San Antonio, you had a 50s architect who designed most of those buildings, and half of them fall back to that continuity and style because the guy also put out a brochure, not unlike Murphy's brochure, or that explained houses of the period, houses of the time. Carmel's always been trying to get back one way or another to its earlier period of architecture.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can I ask another question about this section? After each one of the themes, there's the introduction, there's the context statement of what it is, and then it says on the third line, which is under each of the themes, associated property type, eligibility requirements, integrity thresholds. How do you see, since that is listed under each, so I guess there'll be a section addressing that for each of those eras, how does eligibility requirements and integrity thresholds change from one to another, or are they the same?
I think if you read through a lot of historic context statements, there are going to be similarities. There still will be, there still should be nuances, some nuances from period to period that'll appear in there, but there is repetition there. I guess maybe what you're getting at is do we just do one set of charts for everything, which I never really thought of, but I think there's enough variation, and we'll all go back and look at the PGHCS to see, but even when I use the Pacific Grove HCS, you'll see styles overlap in different themes, right? I think they use the vernacular style in that in 2 or 3 different themes. You generally want those 2 charts to reflect something that's different for each theme if it's there, but there is repetition of language there, and the best way I can have you guys all go check that out. It's just, all you have to do is read one theme in the Pacific Grove HCS to get an idea of where this thing is going. So for each theme, we're going to develop a historical narrative about what went on in the town as far as development is concerned at that time, how it relates to the history. And then we start analyzing the various aspects of the buildings that date to that time. But the way I've seen them done and the way everybody's doing them is that we have these charts within each theme. I mean, maybe it's something to consider once we get it all written up. If there's not enough change, do you just use one set of charts? But it's not something I've seen done before. I think they have to be time. They have to be time sensitive. That's the right word.
Okay.
Any other thoughts or comments about this section? Okay, and then we have the bibliography and the appendices. So if there's any other comments about it in general, or are we ready for a vote?
Do we have to vote on it, or just?
We don't have to vote, just approve it as it is. Okay, so there's no further discussion on it, so I think we move forward to the next step.
Yeah, I support this
Yeah.
general table of contents, so
Absolutely.
I'm enthusiastic to see what what they come up with the next phase of it.
Absolutely.
And did the board have thoughts on a subcommittee for this project or monthly reports to the full board and public?
I think last time we did the monthly updates, right?
There was a subcommittee,
There was.
which I was on, and Catherine was on.
Yeah. That
I mean, if Seth thinks that's helpful, I'm happy to serve again. Can I ask the consultants what they feel? Because a lot of this is a little bit different in that you're not really, my understanding is at least, they're not really searching out a lot of new information, but it's really a reorganization more than anything else. How do you guys feel about it?
I guess we leave it up to you. I think one concern that we have is how much latitude we have to eliminate a lot of what's in the document now. I don't want to get too far into this and somebody goes, what is going on here? This is it's going to be a very different document. I don't think a subcommittee is a bad idea. We're both local. We can meet. We met at Eric's office before. We could always meet in a coffee shop or somewhere in Carmel or Monterey and hang out and hash some of this stuff out. We really don't mind, and I don't think either one of us mind extra meetings.
No.
We want the document. That's why you hired us. We're local. We all consult here. We love this place. We love living here. So I'll leave it up to you guys. I don't think it needs to be a huge subcommittee. I would really appreciate Eric's contributions the last time.
As would I. I'd like to see that happen. But again, this is a tool, not a tome. And the tome can go into the archives for somebody to reference, but the tool is this thing for daily use.
Nicely said. Okay, any other members interested in serving on the subcommittee?
Got too much going on.
Okay.
Jordan, you can do it.
Yeah, I can't.
Esther?
I don't know what's involved. I don't know how much time would be involved.
How much time is involved?
It's really, I think you guys are our bosses, man. I mean, I think it's really up to you. Doesn't have to be more than one person, but I would at least like one person so we could just meet with regularly so they can be the liaison between you guys and in between some of these monthly meetings. So if there's something that alarms you or something that's going on or you think we're going in the wrong direction or something or you don't understand the direction, the schedule is so short that we don't have a lot of time for that,
And then
so just one person would be fine.
So this will go back before the board in July and in September.
So you're not getting that far ahead of
We
it?
anticipate coming to you monthly with an
Yeah.
update.
Okay.
But yes, a working draft by June or July.
So we really have, we will have lots of opportunity for going over this to make it the way we want it, if there's any need for change. Whether there's a subcommittee or not.
You like to
sounds
be the liaison?
Yeah, maybe that's a better term for it. I'll
Yeah.
be the liaison and
Yeah.
keep
Yeah.
up to date. If you guys have questions as we move forward before the meetings, you can always reach out to me and we can officially establish that if you like.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
And then maybe not the first month, but by the second month, we should certainly have a good chunk of this document that we could distribute to everybody. You know, so you'll have it, Eric can do that, or you know, or if you want me to come to one of the intermediate HRB meetings and just give a little talk about where it is, not a problem, just let us know.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Do we need to approve that or no? No? Okay.
Okay, great. Yes, ma'am, please, yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, board members. My name is Mel Alborn. I'm a resident here in Carmel. I had a question, not so much I understand that this new HCS is going to reorganize the volumes of information that we already have about Carmel. My question has to do with everything that's going to wind up, understandably so, everything that's going to wind up on the cutting room floor. And is that simply going to remain in a very large archive, or is there a plan to somehow index that into an appendices set or something else? Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Catherine, you want to take, I think you hinted at that.
Well, it might change as we come back to each month, but preliminarily, I think PAST was thinking that this current version of the context statement kind of be retired and be accessible to the public in our local history room. We thought about, do we make this version an appendix, but it is just too big to be an appendix. Seth, any thoughts?
Oh, I know when Marnie, Catherine, and I talked about this last week, one idea was to call the current context statement, you pull the architectural development chapter out of it, or you could keep it, it doesn't really matter, but social, cultural, and history of Carmel, whatever title we want to do. Or you could say an economic, social, and cultural, and artistic history of Carmel. And because that's really, the strength of the current document is how much is in there about a lot of facets that don't really go into an HCS. So that was one idea we had, and I think, Catherine, correct me if I'm wrong, but Marty and you sort of felt you can't really vet everything in there. There's been some concern about some of the stuff in there is not accurate. We try to correct as much of that on the last phase. But do we have to then vet everything before we change the title? And I think that was the concern of planning staff. So our solution was to have this document exist exactly the way it is now and be accessible to the public. And remember, in the introduction to this new document, we will talk about how this thing evolved over time, and we can certainly reference where that old document is and its location. But anyway, that's the discussion that we had a similar discussion last week. That's kind of what we came up with.
Does that answer the question? Great. Thanks for that. Okay, moving on to the director's report.
So I'll start off this afternoon with a brief update on the housing element, since that seemed to be a topic of interest. We're currently in our 60-day review with the state. We expect to get a letter next Monday, the 25th. And that letter will hopefully say your housing element is in substantial compliance, you're ready to certify, or there might be some additional comments that we need to address. So we have currently scheduled adoption for April 2nd because we're working really hard to meet that April 15th deadline. So you will see the document noticed for adoption, but depending on the contents of that letter on Monday, we'll determine whether or not we're in a position to adopt on April 2nd. So.
One question, if, let's say they reject it, do they give us then longer than April 15th, or do they bring in their henchmen and build skyscrapers?
So HCD is not going to begin enforcement action if we're not certified by the 15th. What they want to see is that we're making, a diligent effort towards certification. After April 15th, though, we no longer have a certified housing element. So it does open us up to some risk. But we will continue to, work hard to get to certification, as quickly as possible and minimize that risk.
Can I ask maybe an ignorant question? So if they say, yes, you're in substantial compliance and you're ready to certify, the city council votes to certify it, and obviously HCD has already agreed to that. Does the Coastal Commission have any, do they look at that at all? Or how do they just are completely apart from that process?
So because we have our adopted local coastal plan, anytime we amend the general plan, we have to amend the coastal plan, which requires that we go to the Coastal Commission. I'm not intimately familiar with the scope of their review on housing elements, but typically they're looking just to make sure that it's internally consistent with the remainder of the plan.
Because they've obviously had to review quite a few of them by now, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, that's all I have this afternoon.
All right,
Well,
any,
I have
go ahead, please.
I have an announcement if
Yeah.
you have a chance. So the Carmel Public Library Foundation, and in partnership with the AIA Monterey Bay, are putting on a fantastic lecture I'd encourage everyone to go through that deals with the architectural legacy and artistic legacy of our area, the Central Coast. And it is a talk on the life of Kip Stewart, who is a local Carmel resident. He was an amazing furniture designer who was working with Charles and Ray Eames in the 50s, I believe, and went on to be founding designer of Summit Furniture. He was a fantastic painter. He's a designer of Ventana Inn and among other a lot of buildings. And I think you'll be really interested in seeing his history and how far his, the amazing talents and the kind of life he led. So I think it's entitled Kip Stewart, A Life in Painting, Design, and Architecture. Design and Architecture. So it's on 7 p.m. at the Carmel Women's Club this Wednesday. So please attend.
Great, thank you. All right, any other future agenda items? We have some, okay, that's it. We'll adjourn the meeting then. Thank you very much.
And you get your tickets, it's almost sold out.
Is it really?
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't think there'd be any problem.